Imagine dedicating over a decade of your life to raising your grandchildren, providing countless hours of childcare a week, moving across the country for them, only to be suddenly cut off with no explanation and no legal recourse. This is the heartbreaking reality for countless grandparents. And this week, we're talking to Cheri, a grandmother who is living that nightmare and has decided to fight back. She shares her story of turning profound grief into a powerful movement to change the law in Indiana. This is a must-listen episode about a silent epidemic and how you can join the fight to protect the sacred bond between grandparents and their grandchildren. Welcome to Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, Nurturing Through Adversity. In this podcast, we will delve deep into the challenges and triumphs of grandparents raising grandchildren. As we navigate the complexities of legal, financial, and emotional support, I invite you to join us on a journey of exploring thoughts, feelings, and beliefs surrounding this growing segment of our society. Drawing from real stories and expert advice, we will explore the nuances of child rearing for children who have experienced trauma and offer valuable resources to guide you through the intricate journey of kinship care. We'll discuss how we can change the course of history by rewriting our grandchildren's future, all within a supportive community that understands the unique joys and struggles. This podcast was made especially for you. Welcome to a community where your voice is heard, your experiences are valued, and your journey is honored. For so many of us, the fear of losing contact with our grandchildren is our worst nightmare. We pour our hearts, our time, and our resources into these children, and the thought of that bond being severed by a family disagreement is almost too painful to imagine. Today's story is about a grandmother who's not just imagining that nightmare, but living it. But instead of being defeated by her grief, she has become a powerful advocate for change, and her story is one that every grandparent needs to hear. Today, we're joined by Cheri and Brooke, representatives from Indiana Grandparents' Rights, an organization that's working towards changing the law in Indiana to allow grandparents whose adult children have denied them access to their grandchildren the ability to petition a court for restoration of those visitation rights. Cheri is one such grandmother, and her story is at the heart of this fight. Cheri, can you tell us more about your relationship with your grandchildren prior to losing contact with them and what your experience has been after being cut off from your grandkids?
Sure. I was there from day one.
As grandparents, I know that this is very emotional for you, and we want to prevent this from happening to other grandparents, and that's why we're here today.
I appreciate that. We were in the hospital when our first grandchild was born. I put on his first sleeper, and we were there every day after. We helped with care when our daughter brought him home. She was a new mom. She was facing many challenges herself.
Mm-hmm.
But we were there from the very start, helping mom with feedings, baths, diapering, keeping her house clean for her because she was overwhelmed. And when she went back to work, I had my grandson between 10 and 14 hours a day as a professional, and her hours varied from day to day. And most weeks I had my grandson for over 50 hours a week. I provided meals, a lot of times paying for those meals, everything that a good grandparent does, bought him clothes, bought him toys, taught him his colors, taught him his numbers. My grandson and I were joined at the hip. We did everything together. I watched the kids when they wanted to go on vacations child-free. My grandchildren would stay with me. All the birthdays, my house. sleepovers. I mean, we went to church together every Sunday. Anything that you can imagine that a loving grandparent would do for the grandchild, that was me and my husband. At that time, my husband worked, so I held most of the responsibility with taking care of my first grandchild.
And how old are they now, Cheri?
My grandson just turned 13. And then my granddaughter, 1 month later, just turned 10. They're 3 years apart. When she came along, I took care of her as well. And that time, my first grandchild was in preschool. I took him to preschool. I picked him up from preschool. I did breakfast every morning. I did lunches, sometimes dinners if their mother was running late, getting home from work, sometimes baths, getting them ready for bed. And all she had to do is go home and spend an hour with them and put them to bed.
So they trusted you for many years with your grandchildren.
I was the primary caretaker. I was with those children more than their own parents.
And so there was an emotional trigger that caused that to change, that caused them to decide that they just didn't want you to see them anymore.
Correct.
Mhm.
There was an issue in the family. We tried to address that issue unsatisfactorily. And at that point, cut off all visitation. We actually got reduced to holding a sign at their schools telling them that GPA and GMA love them. No contact, no phone calls, no birthdays, no holidays, absolutely nothing.
You shared with me that you had a lunch with some friends, other grandparents that had gone through similar issues. So we know that you're not the only one out there that's experienced something like this. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've heard from other grandparents that are going through similar issues such as this?
I have a group of friends, high school friends, and we get together once a month for lunches just to keep in contact with each other. And they noticed that I hadn't been posting pictures of my grandchildren on my Facebook page. And they said, "What is going on?" I had pictures of them every day or
Mhm.
activities for their
Mhm.
mother so she could get on and see during the day what we were doing. And they said, "Something's wrong, Cheri. Your joy's gone." And I told them our situation, and there were 8 of us there that day. And as we sat there eating lunch, 6 of those grandparents start sharing their stories about the same thing.
Mm.
Instantly, I knew I'm not the only one in this boat. There's many grandparents that are suffering this same situation. I've got some examples for you if you'd like me to share.
Love to.
One example is one of my friends who's a grandmother has an adult daughter, and she got a new apartment. And she called her mom that day and said, "Mom, I want you to come see my new apartment." And this grandparent said, "I actually am going to be in court because she deals with rental properties." And she said, "I can't come today." And she said, "I'll come this weekend." The daughter got livid. And just because she didn't show up that very same day, she cut off all visitation with multiple grandchildren. And this person had no recourse. There's nothing she could do until that daughter decided to calm down and decide to give her visitation back. She finally got that, but she was without her grandchildren for, I don't know, months.
Mhm.
Another instance is grandparents' adult son, him and his spouse separated. The spouse took the grandchildren and left the state. These grandparents went to child protective services and other agencies trying to find a way to be able to have visitation rights with those grandchildren. Those agencies did not help them one bit, and a family court lawyer would have told them they haven't divorced officially, they're separated. So you have no legal foundation to petition a judge for visitation rights. Those grandparents did without their grandchildren until they got to the ages of 16 and 18 and could actually drive themselves. Finally, the parents did get a legal divorce and they were able to see their grandchildren, but not because of the divorce, but because they were legal age and they came back home to see their grandma and grandpa. But those grandparents were devastated. They missed out all those young years with their grandchildren.
We know this is an epidemic happening with many grandparents between them and their grandchildren, but you went and got an attorney, right?
I actually had a friend who recommended a family court lawyer in the state of Indiana. She's supposed to be one of the leading family court lawyers. We went to her and talked to her about this situation. She said, let me review everything that you've brought me, the reasons why you want visitation, what's caused this lack of visitation in your family and such. And after she discussed it with her associates, we met with her a month later. And she said, I hate to tell you this, but there is no legal way I can help you get visitation rights with your children. And I said, why? And she said, you don't fit into the three scenarios that the state of Indiana says that you can file for visitation rights. And I said, well, what are those? And she said, the parents have to be divorced. The child has to be born out of wedlock, or one of the adult parents has to have died. And then the other spouse takes away visitation rights from that grandparent. We did not fit in that category. And so she told us, unfortunately, I have no legal foundation to stand on to be able to get you in front of a judge so you can petition for visitation rights. And I looked at her and I said, that is absolutely ridiculous.
Doesn't make sense.
And she agreed with that. And I said, well, then something needs to be done about it. And
Which
she
is
said, I agree.
which brought about the petition that you all started in Indiana. And I'm sure this isn't a problem just in Indiana.
No, it's not. The first thing that my daughter did for me is help me to rewrite Indiana law. That was the first thing. And then to bring awareness to that, then we added the petition to get the situation out there. Brooke can tell you about the revised written law that we presented to my senator, Brett Clark. When I first talked to Brett, he told me that he was a new grandfather. And I shared the situation that we had along with other grandparents who have come to me since that time. And he said, I cannot imagine me being cut off from visitation with my grandchild. And he's a new grandparent. He was 3 months in to being a grandparent for the first time. And he said, that's ridiculous. And I said, I think it is too. And I said, so I'm going to he asked me basically, how would you rewrite the law, or what would you put in it to make it different so you've got that legal foundation to stand on so you can petition a judge? And my daughter is an expert at writing, and I told her the things I wanted in that law, and she went with it. And she revised the new law that we submitted to Senator Brett Clark.
I recently received an email from a listener named Laurel. At 61, Laurel and her husband, who's navigating his own health challenges, are now raising their grandson after a series of unimaginable losses. In 2022, they lost their son to a fentanyl overdose. Then just a year ago, they lost their daughter the same way. The morning after, they'd stayed up late together planning her son's third birthday party. Laurel told me that she lives one day at a time. She's dealing with the financial strain of using her 401k to survive, the physical toll of caregiving, and the emotional weight of what ifs. But she also said something that I want everyone listening to hear. She said that just telling her story to people who can relate is refreshing. That's exactly why we do this. Whether you're navigating addiction in your family, raising a grandchild you didn't expect to be raising, or just trying to find your footing after a loss, we need to hear your story. There's always someone else out there who needs to hear that they aren't the only one. Your experience is a lifeline for someone else. So if you have a story to share, or if you're looking for that community Laurel found, please join our Facebook group or sign up for our newsletter on our website. at grandparents-raising-grandchildren.org. Let's keep relating, and let's make sure no one walks this path in silence. Thank you, Laurel, for your courage to share your story with others. Brooke, can you explain to us some of the details of those provisions that you submitted to State Senator Clark?
Sure, absolutely. So, as you know, lawyers like to look for loopholes and want to find ways to get around things. They're experts at that. So we wanted to expand the language of the law so that there were no loopholes that would leave grandparents high and dry. And, one of the founding principles of the American justice system is that everybody get their fair day in court, their fair chance to explain their side of the story and have justice be served and leave it in the hands of the courts. There are certain situations where maybe a situation would be toxic and unhealthy for a grandchild.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there have been allegations of abuse. This is not a law that gives a blanket right to anybody to see their grandkids, but it does allow the courts to be able to evaluate the situation and see if they do have a fair claim. So some of those provisions that we put in to allow grandparents an additional legal platform to stand on to have the ability to petition are, number one, if there's been a significant relationship between grandparent and grandchild. Number two, if denial of visitation would be detrimental to the grandchild. So maybe it's an infant that the grandparent has never even met before, but over the course of that child's life, having the absence of their grandparent in their life, that would be a situation that would fall under. Number three, if a grandparent has provided care for more than 10 hours per week for more than 3 months total, and that doesn't have to be consecutive, it just has to be cumulative. Or if there can be an argument made that there are compelling circumstances that would override the presumption in legal circles that a parental decision is in the best interest of the child, because legal precedent is that they usually side with the parent, saying that the parent has the rights to make the decisions that are in the best interest of the child. So if there is compelling evidence that we can override that presumption, any of those four categories would be the doorway that a parent or a grandparent could then petition the courts. But we didn't stop there. We said, okay, well, if visitation is granted for this one grandchild, what about other grandchildren that are born? And so we have a provision that grandfathers any future grandchildren that are born from that segment of the family under these mandates, that if they've been granted visitation, that it automatically applies to any future grandchildren from that branch of the family. We also considered, what if a parent tries to run to another state and takes that child across state lines? And there's a provision that the mandate from the court would follow them and remain enforceable, even if they move to another state. Mm-hmm. So then they would have to consider, how am I going to make this work to make sure that the grandma and grandpa can still see the kids periodically? We also gave the law some teeth, that if they fail in their mandate, because we see this all the time with child custody cases between a mother and father that divorce, it can be a big headache. And so if a set of parents fails to follow the mandate and provide those visitation rights that the court mandates, they can be fined by the court. So now there's some teeth. Now there's a monetary component to this. There's also the component that if they fail repeatedly to uphold the mandate, it now allows grandparents to file for third-party custody, where grandparents could possibly even take custody of the children because the parents are failing to follow the mandates of the court. And then also another provision that if a child's removed from custodial parents by the Department of Child Services or Child Protective Services, grandparents who have not had any allegations of abuse against them will be granted visitation, reasonable visitation, and don't have to have CPS supervision for that visitation as well, because there have been kids that have been taken away and their grandparents have not been able to see the kids because they're in foster care through CPS. And so we wanted them to have automatic visitation rights in those situations if there's no abuse allegations against the grandparent themselves.
We tried to think of everything.
Exactly.
I was going to say, it sounds like you've looked at every aspect of this. They sound very common sense to me. Have any of your lawmakers or lawyers said that none of them seem unreasonable?
Brett Clark seems to be on board.
Yeah, he's on board with it. In fact, they had a summit leadership conference, I guess you would say,
The lawmaker.
of the lawmakers in the state of Indiana this August, and he presented the new revised law that Brooke wrote for me. And he presented that to them. When I get back from my visit from Montana, I meet with him to find out how far we got with that.
I was going to ask you what's the status of the new law now?
Well, he took that information to the summit, discussed it with them. Brooke wrote that law so well. He said he can't imagine lawyers going in there and changing the verbiage much at all. He said if there was, it would be very little. And he complimented us and said, "You have thought of everything." And I said, "That's what we tried to do."
You're paving the way for other grandparents that are dealing with the same issue in their own state. What can people do to support what you're doing right now?
So to increase the urgency behind this law, because we're hoping to see that it becomes a bill during this year's legislative session that goes kind of until the end of the year. And so we want to get other lawmakers in Indiana on board. And so we created a petition that people could go and sign to show these lawmakers that this is not just a one-off instance where it's a single set of grandparents who have been wronged. This is a widespread problem. And that petition is at www.change.org/Indiana GP rights. RIGHTS. And people can go there, sign the petition. It takes 2 minutes and it doesn't cost them anything, but it shows lawmakers that there's many people that this issue is important to. And in that process of creating that petition, we also discovered that there are 6 other petitions in the state of Indiana from other grandparents that are seeking the exact same thing. And those petitions have varying numbers of signatures on them. So this is becoming more and more of a movement.
It is.
Of grandparents coalescing their individual abilities to see this through.
It's an epidemic problem. And we've got the epidemic solution.
Right. And then once Indiana changes their law, we hope that becomes a catalyst for other states to also get on board and update their laws so that justice is served. There are other states that are actually ahead of Indiana, such as Alaska, Arkansas. Maryland has very grandparent-friendly laws in place already. Montana has better laws than Indiana. So some of the states already have set a precedence that these changes can be made. And we hope to add Indiana's voice to that list so that other states can fall in line as well. So we recommend that because any grandparent can be affected by this at any time. You never know when a light switch is going to be flipped and a child can choose to turn on their parents. So I would tell your listeners, please look up your own laws in your own states and see where your state stands. It's very easy to do a Google search and find that out. Just search grandparent visitation rights in whatever state you're in, and those results can come up. And then we recommend that you contact your state representatives, state senators, either with a phone call and request a meeting with them, or send them just a letter stating your support of improving, the laws in your state to be fair, more fair for grandparents. And we've actually included a template that can be used, and we're providing that to you, Laura, to help people out.
That's great, Brooke and Cheri. Thank you. We'll make sure to put a link for the petition in the show notes and also a link to a letter that anyone listening can send to their state representative or senator to support grandparents' rights in the state that you live in.
You do not have to be in the state of Indiana to sign this petition. If you are, that's wonderful. But you can be out of state because grandparents are suffering this loss of visitation with their grandchildren in every state. I've heard from people all over the US that are going through the same thing and saying they would do anything to fight to get that visitation right back. I just knew that something needed to be done. And when I got to the end of something, somebody would tell me, that's all you can do. And I said, no, there's got to be more. And we kept looking for ways to do more. And this is it. I'm fighting for Indiana grandparents, but I'm fighting for every grandparent out there that has ever loved a grandchild.
Thanks so much for your courage in sharing your story and for the incredible work that you're doing. You're giving a voice to so many others like yourself who are suffering in silence. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, Laura. We
Yes.
appreciate you so much.
Yes, it's been a pleasure.
The last time that Cheri and her husband Rex saw their 2 grandchildren was on July 29th of 2024. I just want to say that the injustice that Cheri described can affect any grandparent at any time. Please take a moment to support this cause. Go to our show notes to find the link to the change.org petition. It only takes a minute to sign. You'll also find a link to a letter template that you can use to contact your own state lawmakers. Let's stand together and advocate for the rights of grandparents and the well-being of our grandchildren. Next week on Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, after losing her daughter in a tragic motorcycle accident, Jamie Thompson was faced with a choice. Instead of giving up, she turned her pain into power, becoming a Michigan state representative to fight for families like hers. Join us for an extraordinary conversation as Craig Nash of It's a Grand Life podcast and I interview Representative Thompson, who's not just a policymaker in her second term, but a full-time grandmother raising 3 grandchildren. Join us to hear how her journey through unimaginable grief has fueled her fight to fix a broken system, and how her background as a licensed practical nurse and professional doula has shaped her powerful voice for change. This is a masterclass in turning pain into purpose. Thank you for tuning into Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, Nurturing Through Adversity. Remember, you are not alone. Together we can find strength and hope in the face of adversity. Peace be with you, and I pray that you find some time this week to listen to your inner wisdom amongst the noise and the pandemonium of this world.